Today, we're going to talk about content modeling as it relates to search engine optimization. So search engine optimization is specifically about the discovery of our content by Google and other external search consumers. So we're going to talk today about the importance of a content model for SEO, but also beyond, how our content models can help to connect content in a number of forms. So one of the things we are going to look at is the basics of content modeling. So this is definitely a 101. I know there's a number of folks watching today who have advanced level skills. And for those, I appreciate your patience as we walk through some basic concepts, but maybe it'll trigger some ideas as to how we can use models in an extensive way and potentially some vocabulary that we can start to build around content modeling together. It's certainly something the industry as a whole has been struggling with for some time. In fact, there's some folks attending today who have been a part of the Content Modeling Roundtable, which is a discussion that we've been having within the Content Order series, in which we are exploring the ins and outs of content modeling and realizing there's a lot of different ways to look at this important discipline. And then we'll look at how we can learn more overall. This is actually a picture from this morning. So hello, I'm Cruz with A, and you can find out more about A at simpleA.com. Feel free to LinkedIn with me. If you're watching this, just mention that you saw this, and then you can find me on Twitter at Mr. Cruz as well. So it's good to be here talking about the importance of a content model for SEO and beyond. So all content has structure. That structure is evident whether we see it or not. That structure takes place on our renderings within public websites, web applications, single page applications nowadays, mobile apps, and many other forms. We're working with clients who are actively using content inside of operating systems and applications and other usages far, far beyond the traditional website. And all of those content sets deal with content that has an implicit structure. So what we're doing when we're modeling is we're making an implicit structure explicit, and we're using that structure to orchestrate an experience for our customer and for the robots that are consuming our content. When we become aware of structure, we can model it. We can work with the structure independent of the page, independent of the CMS, independent of the application. Structure lives and exists independently of all of these things. It's represented in all of these places. It's used and leveraged and incorporated into all parts of the publishing process and the customer experience delivery and the omnichannel delivery process. It's a part of SEO. It's a part of the way we get our content to connect with external consumers who are looking for structure. But if we don't deal with the model, we're dealing with code and pages and renderings and systems, not the structure itself. So my invitation to everybody is, let's make the model a living, breathing discipline as part of our organization. Let's take the understanding of structure and make it a competency within our teams. And let's make that competency have an artifact that can be shared, the content model. When a model is defined, structure then can be used to transform and adapt into many ways. So this is the same article on simpleA.com, content engineering and the next generation of intelligent customer experience, and different forms of that article. It is being seen in a featured promotional header. It's being seen in a catalog. It's being seen in a promo widget. It's being seen in a sidebar navigation. All of these have different forms of the same description. Some it's short, one's a longer abstract. All of it includes the same image. Sometimes it includes author information. Other elements appear or disappear based on where it shows up in its renderings. So of course, instead of having to manually mark up any of these different places with copy and paste, all of this can flow from a single source. Content management systems of all kinds represent structure in both authoring templates and presentation templates. So the CMS will have an authoring environment, or we'll have an article name, which might be called title. In other systems, or schema.org, might be called headline. But that's a mapping that we can create within our definition of our content model. There's a body, there's an editor's note, a teaser image, whatever we want to do to structure that content. It will have the ability to represent that content then into different presentations. Once we have those elements ready to understand and move as separate things, as separate objects, we can move them around into different presentation templates. And all of those are using different versions of markup wrappers around the same structural elements. When we have containers for our content, we also have the ability to adapt that content by its object-oriented nature into different contexts, different customer experiences. That means our artificial intelligence, or at the very least, prescriptive A/B testing, all can be run against structured elements instead of pages. So when we define structure, we're able to use our models as an important, I would say critical, part of this transformative move that's happening from one-off page design to the assembly of fluid experiences using fluid content. The content model is that centerpiece that allows content to be handled and movable. Aaron, who many of you know, has this wonderful quote in an article that we're proud to host on simpleA.com, Engineering Content for Superior Search Performance. And Aaron talks about the importance of structured data and describes that it liberates the meaning of content from its visual presentation, making it easier for search engines to understand, use, and transform the content. And I love the word liberates. So when you hear the word structure, one might think that means it's constrained. I can do less with it. It's in a structure or a template, therefore I am less able to paint my picture for the world. But the opposite is true. When we add a structural container to our content, we in fact liberate it from the page and give it a life beyond any individual rendering or representation, web page, design. We need those elements to be ingredients in our designs and our renderings. And structure is what connects the ingredients we are authoring with the ingredients available to be designed into markup, and what can happen in the markup that the robots can consume. So what the humans see in the CMS are fields. Those fields have content items in them. The structure is independent of the content item, and we'll talk a little bit more about how important that is. The structure shouldn't be confused with the content item. The structure is independent. It is a separate object. from the many items that it can contain. But in this case, the humans see an article name, and there's a class, article headline, article teaser image, article authorship, that is brought in from an item scope with an item type from schema.org. All of that is available now for the system to use and incorporate as a consumption point for the robots. So we can then see the search engine markup representing those same elements within their search engine result pages. And Google loves to see structured data because it knows there's a higher probability that that content will meet the display needs of the SERP pages, and that there's a higher probability that content will be quality when it is explicitly marked up with consumable structured data. So there is some correlation, and I will leave it up to the SEO experts to define how much correlation there is between the structured use of schema.org markup and consumption. But as WordLift and other organizations are proving, there is an ability to draw a relationship between structured data and rankings in head-to-head tests. So as publishers, it's our responsibility to align structure between authoring and management and publishing to facilitate the flow of the content items and the structural markup that gets rendered out to browsers and robotic consumers. The model is what can help tie all of this together. And when we create a discipline around the model and we use it as a shared artifact for a team to rally around and keep and maintain and grow and extend, then we have a powerful way to align our content workflows. So at A, we work a lot with content publishing supply chains within the enterprise. And a publishing supply chain is basically that life cycle from the time content is the glimmer in an author's mind or even a stakeholder's mind before it goes to authoring, and its entire life cycle until it gets rendered into omnichannel consumption for humans and robots. That supply chain requires a content model. Just can't function without a content model and an orchestration approach for it. So it's a big part of what we do at A, but we think it's a big part of the entire way intelligent customer experiences will be created for everybody in the future on all teams. We think that this way of working with content is ultimately going to be the easiest way to handle omnichannel content for the large part of the digital universe. And the reason we think that is because there's some decades worth of experience seeing content attempting to flow through different forms of content management systems and realizing there needs to be a unified approach beyond technology to managing a model. It is a source of understanding about structure that gets shared by designers and developers and authors, and we think eventually the entire tooling universe will embrace structure so that everyone involved in publishing content on the web can have a shared understanding of how the ingredients of that experience connect with the experiences themselves and the robotic interactions themselves. So a content model does a lot of work. It's the way we understand and talk about structure, and it's one very important expression of structure when we look at schema.org. And we will dive into how we can accomplish mappings between our elements and the schema.org elements. There's many other different representations of structure throughout the life cycle of content and through the many different applications of content, whether it's for compliance, privacy, accessibility, regulation, policy, reuse, omnichannel marketing, marketing automation. Any of these all depend on structure, and structure needs to be a bigger part of anybody's conversation that's dealing with digital experiences that need to operate across different groups and silos. So let's cover content modeling. I'm going to introduce some terms we use at A. We admit that there is not an industry standard yet about any of this stuff, and we should embrace and be comfortable with the fact that the industry itself is evolving. We are proposing these terminologies, but every content containing system uses different variations of the words I'm going to introduce today. So what is content modeling? Content modeling creates a representation of types of content, their elements, attributes, and their independent relationships. What is content structure? Content structure is, in fact, the physical organization of content. It's the form that content takes when it's represented in a database as XML or within other representations of a content object's schema. When structure can agree between systems, or it maps from element to element, content can move between those systems. So structure, in many ways, is the study of the containers that we put our content into. That takes a sort of pure form in the model. And then it takes a very applied form in the different systems. We need to be able to work with the pure form. One mindset shift that anybody doing content modeling must make, even if this sounds like something that only a programmer needs to understand, wherever we sit, we need to be willing to embrace object orientation as a core idea. I will not be able to fully describe object orientation here, but this definition will help to start everybody listening out on the way, if you're not familiar with this core fundamental concept, toward a willingness to learn what this foundational principle is that underpins all content modeling. An object-oriented approach recognizes contents as reusable content objects rather than hard-coded unstructured blobs. Those objects are in containers and they can be pointed to from anywhere, manipulated, transformed, annotated, reused, and managed from a central location. So an object, let's say a title, doesn't have to, if it lives in 5 or 6 different renderings, it can be one entity that we are pointing to, and it can have multiple renditions of itself. That idea is itself why there's a gap between people that understand content modeling and creatives. I think it's down to this, which is that most creatives do not fundamentally yet understand object orientation unless they've been involved in object-oriented CSS class development or other modular forms. And when they have, we can bridge this idea very, very simply, because object-oriented CSS classes, which are part of a design library, are the design version of content objects, which now need to be able to be assembled into those design template renderings or CSS classes. So I'm using a lot of words that are more programming oriented at this point, but the idea is really not itself impossible to bridge for anyone, a business person, a design person, engineer, business analyst, project manager. We need everybody on that team to begin to understand object orientation in order to introduce modeling as a team effort. As publishers, we need to match structured content with a customer intent or query. At A, we call that an intelligent customer experience when our content comes in interaction with the customer's context and creates a uniquely assembled customer experience. For Adobe last year, I did an entire 1-hour overview of intelligent customer experience with a lot of examples. And anybody interested in learning more about these ideas that underpin intelligent customer experience can look for that webinar also on simplea.com or via Adobe. All intelligent customer experience flows from how we engineer a content model. So we can't get to contextual experiences without this model, and so we need to invest in understanding, building, and maintaining content models. Content types are one of the foundational ideas. We're going to go over this in a couple of different ways. I'm going to walk through a description of these, and then we're going to build a understanding of a model that is like a cake with different layers. And we're going to talk about these foundational components of models along the way. So hopefully together that will form a picture of the content model and how it relates to schema.org and other structured data that helps to uplift content for search engines and make it more consumable. So first of all, the content type. It's a unit of content that has a common purpose, and it contains an enumerated structure of elements with associated attributes. So an example would be an article, a webinar, a podcast, a case study, social posts, emails. All of those are content types. Today's class is being recorded, and we're going to take snippets and parts of this. So overall, we've got one asset, which is a content type that might be called webinar or live stream. And then we're going to break it up into pieces that might have different definitions. And those might be social share videos, or they might be trailers or promos. So the subset of the bigger content asset, the webinar, is also itself an asset and itself a content type. They can share elements. Elements do not have to live in only one type. They can be shared as long as they are the same. We wouldn't want to repeat a title from place to place. We want to be able to use the title element and then associate it with different outputs or views of that content. So we'll talk through what a view is in a moment. Elements are the main constituent of a content type. It's a unique container of structure. So when we're talking about structure, we're talking about containers, the element is the container. So that is an article title, a body, author, teaser image, event time, dates. There's literally infinite permutations of what an element is. And a content type contains elements. And then elements are then able to be represented within our CMS templates. Attributes are the structured details that specify the characteristics and behavior of an element. So this can include the rules and guidelines and values, relations, which can include domains and ranges, data types or constraints related to an element. An example would be character length, or the CMS field type or data type, or an internal description, or owner, or conditional use scenarios. All of those things are part of the overall attributes related to a particular element. So there's a lot more to modeling. At A, we've been working on this term graph. And a term graph, in our view, is just a way to understand a domain of terminology. We're putting together one for content modeling as a whole, and working with some leaders on trying to align some understanding around this terminology. But let's drill into some of the basics here. The key building blocks are the content type, which is constituted by many elements that has characteristics and behavior that are specified by attributes. So content types contain elements, elements have attributes. That is the essence, the essential piece of a content model. It includes types, elements, and attributes. Then we need to be able to look at various renderings that are composed of elements. Those renderings we call views. And it is any collected representation of content pulled together from our content model elements. So we can define that within the model itself so that humans can understand what are the ingredients related to a particular customer experience that's being created. So a view is a group of elements assembled for use in a particular display context. So the examples are homepage promo, call to action banner, category page, a catalog, article, promo box, a tooltip, alert modal, email. All of those are different ways that content can be rendered. In our view, the word views should also apply to any markup rendering as well, which includes anything that will be consumed by robots. So when we're creating views, we're looking at a way to design the content's consumption by humans and robots. The same thing with our content model. It's for humans and robots. When we put those two mindsets together, we have the building blocks for a truly comprehensive content model, and not one that's just representing what a page looks like, that we're using to help to interact with designers. That's important. We need to model websites. We need to model content domains that are meant for limited consumption scenarios. That needs to be considered, in our view, a subset of something bigger, that at A, we have titled the master content model, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is. We also have a concept at A we call MixIns. Now, this is probably new to almost everybody because I think we just made this up as a way to describe the mappings container for external schemas in our primary content model. So a mixin is an independent schema used to extend a content model via mappings between elements. Schema.org is an example. DITA, Darwin Information Type Architecture, for those interested in structured content authoring from the TechCom's perspective, may be familiar with DITA. DITA is making inroads through our work and the work of others into marketing. There's the beginning understanding of using DITA for marketing that's being built into tooling that Adobe's creating. Others are looking at bridges there as well. So schema.org is the native marketing tool set. It's built for search discovery. It's a robust and detailed and peer-reviewed and vetted and machined amazing schema that's in production in many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of sites today. DITA is also in many thousands of enterprise implementations. But those two things don't talk, and that's one of the things we're attempting to bridge with our master content model, is a bridge between those two specs, but also Open Graph and Dublin Core, and when we're in healthcare, HL7, and there's so many other schemas, and they need to be able to be related and mapped together. So when we're, as content engineers, at A, we teach content engineering, we have a need to use mixins or third-party schemas or external schemas as the basis by which we create our own content model that we're using and managing and maintaining, the basis for all the schemas in our systems throughout the organization. So schema.org is a way to enhance our content model. So we took our explicit field types that we were defining within a content type, right? So those elements are then mapped to schema.org, to Open Graph, which is a way of getting content to display within social media properties, particularly Facebook, but also others. There's also Twitter cards, and all of those are external schemas we're going to call for this conversation MixIns. So when we are going through to look at what are the elements we need, we are mapping the root element in our main model along with the extended mappings to elements inside of schema.org and Open Graph, right? Schema.org calls it properties. Open Graph probably calls it something different. Everybody is dealing with some language variation here. We like the word element. So we're mapping a content model element to a schema.org property within a content model. Schema.org as a whole becomes a mix-in to our primary model. Then we can look at extending our model with things like mobile and AMP specific elements. AMP is, depending on who you talk to, of varying importance for mobile display of content, and there are specific elements that need to be included for AMP. So we can include that within a mobile pass at our content model. And then we look at how can we extend that content type with social sharing variants. So that same article type might be extended with social variants. So the authors don't have to do that in some other place. They do that within a single content item, and then that content can then be represented and into social form. The same thing with our Twitter card. So schema.org, Open Graph, Twitter card, and for our enterprise clients, we've got DITA and other mix-ins associated with that structure. And then we have the possibility of moving our content into intent and response form. So we're big fans of question and answer content being incorporated into the article itself through the content model so that chatbot intent and responses can be inherited from a structural model defined as part of the overall content management strategy. So there is an ability to inherit question, answer, intent, response content within the article level or the content ID, whether it's an event or a job posting or whatever. We can create intent response variations at the level of that content type as elements, as a sort of section of elements. And we can associate that with schema.org as well, so that our chatbot API may be able to become almost like another mix-in to the primary or master content model. And that all of that helps us to get our content into different forms. We're not ever going to be able to run an entire chatbot out of structured content elements built into a CMS, because there's a lot of other conditional if-then content and third-party AI driven content that is informing those different chat sessions. But we can use it as a source, as one of the sources for our chatbot content. So, I just want to point out that the work we're doing in incorporating chatbots is not unrelated to the work we're doing with the search engines. There's an intent and a response. And search engines are basically really slow chatbots with really long answers compared to the way a chatbot works. But it's the same thing. So we're ultimately needing to look at our content in conversational frame when we're modeling. So that's something that is a mindset to bring to the content model. Then we can add our personalization variants. This is a big deal in this new world of micro-targeting content variations out to audience segments, add email marketing variants, and then all of that kind of gets boiled into this cake for our article type content model. Within our content model, our article type contains these different layers to the cake and extensions that are part of the overall extended attributes on the elements we have. So that whole structure together starts to become a single representation of a lot of omni-channel customer impacts, and that is what we call the master content model. So let's walk through a little story about content modeling, and then we'll go through some resources and wrap up and have some questions and some discussion. So within the world of content modeling, let's kind of step back and say we're a fruit farm, and we own this beautiful orchard and series of orchards, and we've got a way to process all that, and we ship it out both direct and through wholesalers, and we're looking at a way to kind of represent all of this whole sort of domain of our fruit farm into different customer experiences. So first we need to inventory the content domain. First we need to understand, what are we dealing with, right? So we're dealing with different kinds of products. We're dealing with different kinds of fruit. We're dealing with different kinds of distribution options. We're dealing with different kinds of consumers and retail locations. So once we do that, we can kind of take that inventory and break it up into content types. The inventory can take a lot of different forms, but within the general area, the practice of content strategy, there's some wonderful resources about building content inventories. We, in general, want to use that kind of exercise as an input into creating a larger model for our content. Once we have our content types, we can flesh them out with detail about what is part of that content and how do they relate. So we start to create notes about all of that. So this is the beginning of understanding the elements and the relationships between the different content types. And so this is a rougher form of an actual content model that is that's being fleshed out to include basically all the raw material we need to then organize and prioritize. So we can prioritize into these different categories. Here's our online and physical retailers and leads and events and distributors. And we pull all of those types together, products and recipes and whatnot, into type inventory. That type inventory we then can organize into a relationship model, content relationship diagram. We look at the different actors within the system and how they interact with the content elements and how those may represent themselves into different systems. It's obviously a very simple variation of a set of type relationships, but we can see that product growers are interacting with products that then are being ingested into recipes and events and various retailers and driven out to consumers. Products are also being published out to distributors, which are using that to publish out to store locations. When we look at larger content ecosystems, we can look at, who's the consuming party for content types. So for example, we might have a content API, content as a service endpoint, that allows us to take that content and use it in a syndicated form. So that syndication life cycle is something we represent within the overall type relationships. So once we kind of have this domain map and we've got some fleshed out content types, we can really then begin to drill down into an element definition. So out of one of our elements, fruits, let's take a look at some of the way one of our types, element fruits, we could look at some of the elements like brief description, long description, nutritional labels, source, SKU, number that compose that, and put that into an inventory. Once we do that, there's an important step here, sometimes gets missed. Before this becomes a model that's functional, we need to test and refine it with sample content. No content model ever comes out fully baked from a whiteboard. It is only after interacting with the real world that a content model begins to take true meaning for customer experience. And so we really need to have a relationship between our real world content and our sample content tests that we run through the model with in different mock-up scenarios before we take it to production, before we take it to code. Then we can build system interactions as a extension of that content relationship model, along with those that tested element definition, and we can turn that into a series of specifications that start to become able to drive a content management system, or a CSS design library, or a process for developing an inherited email newsletter. All of that can work off of the content model when we know where schema is represented in different places. There's a lot more to this in terms of overall content technology architecture and putting together the larger supply chain picture and the content as a service architecture that ultimately supports omnichannel. But even very simple publishers who are doing just one website in WordPress or Drupal, or they're just focused on web publishing and SEO, can still take this same methodology and apply it, the same thinking process, at that single channel, single content set with limited content types, but then they've got something to grow on as they start adding new systems. And instead of adding those in an ad hoc copy and paste way, they're adding that in an organized way so content can grow with them. So that's what we want to do, is as content change agents, we need to be advocating for a single source of core content that is delivering multiple customer experiences. And members of the content order all share that vision. We have this little peer-based group that we are working with and forming into roundtables and other kinds of discussions. And it's all folks who share this idea that core content needs to exist as a shared artifact among multiple content producing functions within an organization. And that is out of which we create an intelligent customer experience. It's that idea that content is an asset that's important and durable. It's not just this disposable thing put into our CMSs. It lives in multiple places and ways, and we're the stewards of that content and that customer experience and the way it interacts with the world. As we get into a world mediated by some more semantic web with more linked data interactions, understanding the structure is going to be the foundational elements that really allow us to embrace a world that starts to become more connected and interrelated and intelligent. It's important to recognize that the data is not the model. The model is independent of the data. The model is independent of the content. The model is independent of the experience. The model is independent of any particular owned platform. That independence is something that means we need to pay attention to it in an independent way. So we can map our content types to many, many, many content items and many, many different renderings. If you're interested in learning more, we do have a few resources we can recommend. The very first thing I would do is just Google structured data. There's some really, really good publishing out there by a number of folks who've been publishing in this space for a very long time, deep, deep experts. If you're interested in the way A looks at the master content model, you can take a look at a white paper we built on this. We talk about the parts of a master content model, how to build and manage it, implementing it into operations. That's available for free. We also have a really great article series that just came out from some great folks like Ann Rockley and Carolyn Swift-Machat, Aaron Bradley, and a lot of others that are on the sort of forward edge of engineering content inside of their enterprises and inside of the market. But there's a lot of folks working on structured content for portability and reuse in the world. At A, we're actively working to help to unify a conversation so this next era of intelligent content can be something we share, not just something that's happening within different consultancies and practitioner groups, but that's something that we understand collectively as a society. Because a lot of what we're doing here is bringing together people. You know, the content model is also about the relationships that are formed during the process of building the model, the conversations that are necessitated by sharing a model between designers and developers. Those conversations are just as valuable as having an artifact for the model itself. And a friend said, I think Jeff Eaton said, I learned the content model is the friends I built along the way. You know, I don't think I'm getting that quote exactly right, but that sentiment I think is shared within the content modeling space. We all know that the model is a very practical artifact, useful for technical stuff and design stuff, but it's also the basis for a relationship with others. It's a way to share an understanding of the shape of knowledge and how it moves and represents itself in the world. It's a way of understanding reality. So if you're interested in content intelligence generally, content intelligence, A, is the effect that happens in an organization when content engineering, operations, and strategy are orchestrating together within a new content operating model to facilitate the flow of intelligent content. That vision for content intelligence that's being advanced in many of the largest enterprises out there today, and we hope many of the mid-market and ultimately smaller entities will kind of share this understanding of orchestration against common models. The Academy is a course we have put together, spent a whole year putting this together, and it is ready. And actually we just recently had a 30-person team have all their managers and every one of their directors take the Academy course. So anyway, that's available at simply.com Academy. And then also for free, the content modeling roundtables, we are available for content order members. These are really nerdy, wonderful discussions that go very deep and with some really cool screen sharing from folks who are showing their ways of content modeling. And part one is already available and packaged and online. There's a trailer even on the website. And part two is coming soon. That's in post-production. And we hope to have a part three to this and would also welcome larger participation in this dialogue that we're having. All right, thanks for your time in a crazy world and a busy moment in history. Looking forward to our conversation now and ongoing.